to the Talent Optimization Podcast, the go-to podcast for CEOs and HR professionals wanting to bridge the gap between the strategy and tactical implementation of talent optimization within their organizations. Through interviews, predictive index, and personal experience, your host, Tracy Shirk, helps you discover the facets of talent optimization from both a CEO and HR perspective to truly create the dream team for your organization. Are you ready? Let's get started.
Welcome to Talent Optimization. My name is Tracy Shirk, and we are continuing our conversation this month talking about mentoring programs inside of our organizations. And let me tell you, we have a special treat today. With me is Bob Gregg, and Bob is a partner at Boardman and Clark in Madison. And my favorite part of his introduction is that one of his jobs throughout life was being a beer taster. So we'll get to that in a second. But Bob's going to share with us a bit about what are some of the pitfalls to mentoring programs from the legal perspective. I know, downer, right? But it's not. So Bob, welcome.
Thank you very much.
So Bob, I'm super curious. What are some of those key things within mentoring programs? Because it's an absolutely wonderful concept, but you're an attorney. So we're always looking to say, how do we protect our organizations?
Right. Well, mentoring is wonderful. I mean, it's got so many benefits, but there are areas of caution in which mentoring can create negative effects. It can have adverse impacts on and legal liabilities. Most of the concerns come under the discrimination laws, and mentoring cases challenging the harms of mentoring, have been brought due to sex, race, national origin, religion, age, disability, all of the things covered by discrimination. If we want to talk about the major areas, they're really a failure to take a look at the informal aspects of mentoring, because we design programs often on paper with outlines, and we don't even take a look below the surface and find out that really some of the extracurricular informal things are much more critical than the actual formal program. Another area is matching people. And I guess the third area is similar. It's choosing mentors that actually have skills, all of which goes into the area of discrimination. So yeah. I don't know if you want me to just launch into number one or.
Yeah. And what's really fun is, last week, if you followed our podcast or if you haven't, go back and listen to last week's where we talked about high potential mentoring programs. And we actually hit on all three of these, because one of the things I think that's incredibly important with mentoring is how we set up that program, but the fact that informal mentoring happens. And I will name, for me, the majority of the mentoring I've had in my life has been the informal mentoring, and it's been so incredibly valuable. But how do you get those informal mentors? What does that look like? Because that matching has huge liability in it. So I'll let you launch into that one.
Okay. Well, my concerns about the informal, the extracurricular part, is, of course, the harms that are done. Mm-hmm. Other people are much more adept at saying, here's how you do things. And of course, as an attorney, I say, here's how you don't do things. Be cautious of these. And if you're cautious of these, then with that caveat, go ahead and see what you can do. Often people say, Bob, are you a inspirational, motivational speaker? And I say, oh, no, I'm a demotivational speaker. Motivational speakers say, accomplish, test the limits, color outside the lines. And I say, stay inside those lines. You could be sued. So
how do we stay inside the lines inside of mentoring programs?
Well, here's the first one, the informal. Off the job, social issues have consequences. And many people, many organizations have things that are extracurricular, like you've got the company basketball team. It may be the pet peeve of the vice president, of an executive. And so if you join that team, you spend a lot more time with the executives, with the managers. You get to pick up the inside track because people talk. The trouble is they talk a lot in the locker room. That's how you get to know people. There's only one gender in that locker room. And so if that's a significant way to get known, to get recognized, to be on the inside track, and when there are chief assignments, well, They're obviously going to pick the people that they know and like because they've met them in that extracurricular. So organizations have found that if that's the way you get ahead, it automatically leaves out certain people, both on gender, perhaps on disability, perhaps on a variety of other things. And it's not that we shouldn't have those. We should find a way to identify these hidden issues and find a way to balance them, find a way to get similar experiences for other people who just don't fit into that locker room or whatever the activity is. Another issue, and even a bigger one,
So you mean beer drinking, like the beer drinking club can be an issue, Bob, is what I'm hearing you say.
That is the next one I was going to talk about.
Okay.
And, because often people do go out and they say, hey, let's go to happy hour. Let's have a social event. And I know in the legal profession, for instance, and I think in sales and a few others, we had in our law firm some of the really experienced attorneys, a couple of them that liked to take out the new associates, said, let's go and buy them beers. And that's where you learned the war stories. That's where you got the real experience that you would never, ever, ever get simply working with somebody who's your mentor on a brief and learning the law and the techniques and going through a case. I mean, you really got your knowledge in this one. It was important. It was crucial. And when you did that, again, those people who were buying the drinks, the really good attorneys, got to know you. And they would select you next time they had a trial, for instance, that was going to be significant. Well, the trouble is not everybody fits there. I didn't fit into that. I became a single parent when my child was 14 months old. And I wasn't going to any after work drinking. I had to go home. I had to pick up a kid. I had to cook dinner. I had to take care. That wasn't there. And I was unusual because I was a man. The vast majority, overwhelming majority of single parents are women. And out of that, a huge percentage are women of color, of various groups. They're not going to get that experience. Now, I'm not suggesting we say never drink a beer. Like, invite me now that my child is much older and out of the house. Right. But how do we get that experience for people who don't meet that moment? First, we have to identify that that's how people are getting experience, because we never even thought about that. Right. And that's the inside track. Not only that, but there are people who don't go to bars. There's the Knox versus SunTrust case is one of my favorites, where the vice president, just loved by everybody, drinks and leaned on them, go to social events and come with me after work. And Mr. Knox said, well, my Christian beliefs say that I should not drink and I should not go to places where people do. Mm-hmm. Well, the vice president didn't like that. And he started going around saying, church boy don't drink. Church boy thinks he's too good to go out with us. And Mr. Knox suddenly was missing out on assignments. All the other people were distancing from him because they didn't want to get on the bad side of the VP. And he won a major case because his religion prevented him from getting the mentoring, from going to where things really happened, and you got the inside track. Or if I choose a place to go and do that, and I have not thought of the comfort level of other people, is it accessible? Or I'm comfortable as a white man. I never noticed that there was any issue here, but when you walk in and you are perhaps not male or you are not white, and you start taking a look at the posters on the wall and, the way people look at you, well, nobody ever looked at me like that. That's because I look like them. But when people come in different and it's uncomfortable to go there, there was one instance a few years ago where this sort of informal get ahead stuff happened in a tavern. And if you looked on the wall, this was back during the Indian rights period, there was a big poster that said, spare a fish, shoot an Indian, spear an Indian. Now, that's not conducive to the comfort level. And of course, the guys never even looked at that. I never even noticed.
Right.
And so we have to do some thought about where. So again, I'm not going to say, let's stop doing this. I'm going to say, we've got to think through where, how, who doesn't fit, and how do we get similar experiences to those people, because only some people fit. That obviously leads to discrimination. It leads to discrimination in pay, because the people that benefited are getting the choice assignments, they're getting the bonuses. And so we have an equal pay case from people who are doing equal work, but they just didn't get the inside track. And I wonder how that happened. Well, because human resources or the executives never did the analysis. So it's important to review and find out, what are the informal channels?
And what is that analysis that you would suggest, right? Because there's one thing of saying, hey, let's take a look at what bars we're going to, or can we do this, at a different, I know I'm still going to bars, but, can we look at this and say, we're going to do a bowling tournament, or we're going to go do some other activity, that may not be that. We're going to go snowshoeing or whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
Where there's different options and it's not always the same.
Well, and I think that's a good thing to do. And I'm not suggesting that what we do is now let's find a whole round of extracurricular activities, because again, sometimes in order to solve a problem, we have now created a great burden.
Correct.
Oh my.
Correct.
Good Lord, now they want me to snowshoe. But what my suggestion is that we look below the surface. And these are just a couple of examples of the informal, hidden things that create the real mentoring. And so let's identify what that is. Let's talk to people about what they're doing in their interaction. Talk to the new people about, how are you meeting people? What are your activities that you're doing with people? But, and it may be a variety of other things, but there are a lot of informal channels that we don't even think about because we've never bothered to try to study and identify them.
Absolutely.
So that was number one.
Yeah. And it's also, I think, the conferences that you go to and who you're riding in a car with or who you're traveling with. I mean, that is key time that there's no distractions, that a lot of really great conversation can happen. And how are those individuals chosen? So now that we've finished number one, and we look at major areas of caution under the anti-discrimination laws. And I'm curious for what you have for these.
Well, that first one is a major area because the people that don't quite fit. But the second one is a little more overt, and that is, how do we do some of the matching? And I'm not an expert on how you match people up, but here's how you don't. How's that?
You mean you don't want to be the matchmaker, Bob?
No, I have been a terrible matchmaker. I try to stay out of that. In the reaction, for instance, to the hashtag #MeToo movement and the real concern for sexual harassment, a number of organizations took the opposite approach, and in their fear of sexual harassment, they made a decision that no man will mentor a woman, period. Now, I think you can, on the surface, say that that's a discriminatory. In order to prevent discrimination, we create discrimination.
Do you like how we create bigger problems with our solutions?
That's right. And they didn't think about it. This is a rush to protect. And it also makes a presumption that, men are beasts and women are whatever. But here's the effect is that two effects. Number one, you create a segregated mentoring program. Two, since we are still a society where most senior positions are held by men, it automatically meant that women did not get mentored by the people at the top of the organization. They got mentored by the middle tier of the organization, where women tend to be. And so they didn't get those choice assignments. They didn't meet the big clients. They didn't get known by the people that were at the top of the organization. Again, the same effect is over time. That meant that the people who were mentored by the people at the top got known. They got more bonuses. We have unequal pay and we have unequal development. And we also have unequal retention because people become keenly aware of this. And not only that, we have denied those men the opportunity to work with people who are different than they, to get to know and trust the abilities of people who are different than they. And so we perpetuate the problem of discrimination that we were actually trying to prevent. A similar thing works in stereotypical and limiting assignments, especially in the area of race. We want to make sure the people who are different feel comfortable. And one of the ways we do that is we assign them to somebody of their race to do the mentoring. And that has the same effect because where's the power in the organization? And we concentrate the mentoring and therefore perpetuate the power at one end in the middle level with different races. And we have denied the mentors the ability to understand, get used to, trust people who are different than they. We've harmed the organization, but we have also created overt discrimination in our zeal to make sure people fit in and feel comfortable. One of the things that I would suggest is that if you have a concern about stuff like this, especially sexual harassment, etc., have a team, dual mentoring. I mean, there's nothing that says it's got to be a one-on-one. That dual mentoring will help me because I've got somebody who is a peer, as a mentor, who can help me understand, who can second guess my biases, my judgments, my reactions, help me grow and enable me to help the new employee. So, team mentoring can be a really good concept.
Absolutely. And there's some power of triads, right? And we use triads a lot in coaching, but that triad is then when there's that mentoring or that coaching going back and forth and you have a third party that's that listener, they can see things that neither of the other two can, and everybody's learning from that.
Exactly. I mean, I've learned so much by being on a team with people different than I. I think I'm pretty enlightened. But
don't we all, right? We're all
exactly. And that's the trouble. We all think we're good people, and we all think that we are good people. And we all think we are going to do things to solve problems like prevent discrimination. But, I grew up with who I am among the people I grew up with, my culture, my values, and I react to other people through that. And I'm not even aware I have biases.
Right.
Until somebody who is different than I, like a co-mentor, a member of my team who is different, points it out to me and says, I don't see it that way, makes me examine it, because we're triggered by our past. Have you ever met somebody? I meet somebody, I never saw them before, and I don't like them. I don't know why I don't like them.
Right?
Yeah, but I don't like them. And I'll treat them like somebody I don't like. I'll have an attitude about who they are and what they do. And then I'll wake up in the middle of the night and think, Uncle Jack. They reminded me of Uncle Jack. It was amazing. And so.
All of our unconscious biases. Right. And I mean, so not only do we have the unconscious biases, but we have the multiple competing priorities that happen.
Or people will remind me of my Aunt Bonna, who I loved. And I'll just, wow. And the other person on the team did not have my Aunt Bonna. In fact, they'll say, this person isn't very good. I say, oh, they're golden. And then we take a look at it, and I am reacting to my biases. But fortunately, they did not have my uncle. They did not have my aunt. They did not have the drill sergeant. If you remind me of my drill sergeant, I'm sorry. And so that difference of perspective makes me stop and wonder why I am making these presumptions. And so that dual mentoring can be wonderful, and it's golden in trying to catch discrimination and to enable the organization to say, Okay, we can have a man mentor a woman. We can have a woman
Mhm.
mentor a man. We can have people get to know each other who are of different races, groups, and work together and enhance the process.
Yeah. And so we're talking about, the mentors. And in a second, we're going to get into how are our mentors actually trained, because I think that's a key
Right.
piece of it. But also, so last week I talked a lot about high potential mentoring programs. And one of the key issues that we have with how we choose our mentees is there's a key distinction between if somebody has potential and if somebody's actually performing and what that performing is. Because as organizations, we don't always do a great job of tracking performance.
Yeah.
Because we just like them, because they remind us of,
Aunt Bob.
our Aunt
Right.
Boba, right?
That's correct. And, I think that is the third area. And I think perhaps the more difficult one, because the one we just talked about, I think is overt enough that you can say, oh, yeah, I can see
for sure
how that works. The other one, the informal one, once we're able to identify it, well, now we've identified it and we can do something about it. The third one is assignment of who gets to be a mentor. That one, I will leave to the experts, but the problem is that we don't give thought to it. We say, so-and-so is a good performer, therefore they must be a good mentor. Not necessarily. They found out that in universities many years ago. In order to teach a high school, you have to go through education classes and you have to get certified. In order to teach at the college level, you have to show that you published a lot of articles. That doesn't mean you can teach them. It means you've got the credentials. You don't have to take a single education course in your life to teach a science course, to teach a whatever. And so they realized they had a lot of people in classrooms that were excellent at performance and rotten. They'd sit up there and drone away and everybody would go to sleep. And the same thing happens when
that never happens, Bob.
You haven't attended any of my seminars, have you?
You've got a really good one coming up, though.
I do. So anyway, sometimes they say you're a good performer, therefore, and that doesn't mean they have the skills. Sometimes organizations go down the list. They say, okay, who's next on the list of mentors? Who's next on the list? And they just put them together without any thought of the match. And especially when we go back to the issue of discrimination, we don't think about whether the person has the understanding and the ability to mentor somebody who is different than they. Because like I said, I come in with my set of preconceptions, who I am, where I have come from, my culture. And if I have not had any understanding of the fact that not everybody is like me, and not everybody's going to do it like me, and why, then this is a recipe for failure. I mean, we've done that in our law firm. We started with the issue of interviewing. We recruit, we try to do diversity, and then we interview people. And so senior staff and attorneys come on and they interview the candidate. How do we select who interviews? Well, we put out a memo and says, we're going to have some interviews next Tuesday. Anybody interested, come. There are free sandwiches. And so people come for the sandwiches.
Ever.
and you'll get a lot more concern about where are you ordering the sandwiches than can I see the resume of the applicant. And so people are in there and they're just stumbling all over. They're asking questions that are wholly inappropriate, because how would the tax attorney know what's human resources and what the employment laws are?
Hold on. You mean you don't have a formal interview training program for your...
Now we do. Because,
I was going to say, I can do that for you, Bob. No.
We identified that, and you're not supposed to be able to interview people first unless you have some knowledge about the illegal areas. Please do not, the do nots. And then let's talk about...
Don't ask him if you went to church with me,
Right, exactly.
And what church it was.
and, where are your kids going to go to school? And just stay away from that. But beyond that, we are developing I think, a fairly robust diversity program with trying to achieve understanding in general of people, and then selecting those people who actually have participated, gone through that, and demonstrated some either understanding or especially understanding of what they don't know. And then who do we team up with to make sure that that happens? And so it's, how do we select people who are appropriate for a group of folks that is going to be diverse, and they are going to be working with and training people who are different than they, and therefore they need the skill to teach the profession, but also the skill to interact with people who are different and get them up and moving.
Yeah. And I think one of those things, whether this is a legal issue or not, but I think it's really important, is when choosing who your mentors are, they also have to be learners, right? Because there's so much that you can learn from a mentee, but if they're completely cut off from that, it's not a mutual relationship with the back and forth and the seeing what's there. Yeah, the mentor's there to guide the person because they've been in those shoes and they've been through those war stories and those things, but there also has to be a back and forth there. And that's where I've seen a lot of mentor programs fail, because they're ineffective because that mentor has an unwillingness to learn.
I have learned so much from both the people on teams that I've been with who are working with new employees, and so much from the people that I have, the new employees that come in, because they bring so much that is different, that I was not aware of, a fresh perspective. And right, I have to approach this knowing that I am going to get a benefit out of this as well, and I'm going to learn some stuff. Mm-hmm. The other thing that we need to do, and I think I mentioned this before, is we have to have a review process. We have to, more than just checking, hey, how you doing? Everything going okay? You working good with Charlie? No, we have to have a more robust, formal way to check in to see, is it working, is it not, to find out what people's perspectives are, what their comfort levels are, et cetera, what other things that they are engaging in, and especially who else they are working with in the organization, because sometimes you find out that the mentor mentee, that's okay, but when I really got an issue, I go to this other person.
Right.
And now we can identify, especially, we have an attorney, for instance, that over time we have realized a lot of the new associates, regardless of who they're assigned to, they say, oh yeah, I go to John. We've identified John is somebody with particular skills and patience, who is not the mentor, but he actually is.
Right.
And so you identify the appropriate people that way.
Right. And those informal mentors, it's understanding what that is. And then sometimes you don't want to formalize it, right? But there's times where you need to figure out, okay, what is John doing so we can duplicate this in a positive way?
Correct. You got to have a little bit of formal structure. Otherwise, there are people who just fall through the cracks and we don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that we always do is we set up, what are the business results we're trying to get from this? So what is that business outcome we're trying to get from having a mentoring program, and actually setting up those benchmarks, right? So, is it that the mentee is gaining confidence? Is it that you're going to look at what percentage of these individuals are actually promoted within the next 5 years? Mm-hmm. Is it you're looking at, did we decrease customer complaints by X%? Whatever it is, right? But that confidence piece is a huge one. And just, having that list of, here's 10 areas that we really want them to look at. Here's where they rate themselves at the beginning of the program, in the middle, at the end. And having that mentor do the same thing with how they feel this individual is doing, because it starts to pinpoint, okay, these are the core values of the organization. And these are the things that the traits we've identified that will get them to the next level. I mean, it's very
Yes.
different being in a management meeting versus being in a board meeting versus leading a board committee versus a board meeting. Like those are all different levels that you need to incrementally get to, that you can have some really significant impact with mentoring, but it has to be the right kind with the right objectives and outcomes aligned to it.
Absolutely. I've been nodding my head up and down on everything you say. And then I realize that this is not video and nobody can hear my head roll. So yes, absolutely.
I've been doing the same. My hands are going all over the place. Awesome. So with that being said, I guess, do you see any pitfalls specifically relating to how you set up the structure of your program?
I think that one is the one that I will leave to the experts. Here's the thing about my profession is I get to tell you what not to do.
Not what you do. I love it.
Yeah.
So,
and I say, if you want somebody who's an expert at then doing this, keeping those cautions in mind, then I recommend other people. It's not that I don't solve problems, and I do have a lot of good ideas in many areas. Mm-hmm. This one particularly, I think I would refer back to the people that you have already spoken to and who you already have programs with.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And we do have some mentoring programs. So if any of our listeners are interested in it, we do have our mentoring program where we actually come in and we train your mentors. So there's a couple different levels of that. But before we, close out here, Bob, I'm curious. So we've talked a lot of different things, and, we've got two different audiences that listen in. So what's a takeaway for our executives and CEOs listening in today?
I think the main one is take a step back and realize your mentoring program is not a formal program that's on a piece of paper. It requires you to do some in-depth viewing of how it actually works in reality. And the reality is often the informal parts, the things that we don't think about, the selections that we make. And so look under the surface. Take a look at these cautions, use those as a guideline, but look under the surface, because that's where most of the mentoring takes place.
Absolutely. And what's a takeaway that you have for HR professionals?
They're in charge of this. They've got to set up this program and convince people of that. And frankly, I think that in most organizations, the HR function creates the mentoring program and helps select and does the training. Because look, if I am the professional doing the work, I'm not going to devote my time to creating an education program for me. In fact, you're going to have to persuade me that I need it. That is the HR function, is to do that homework and set up the framework and then get people's buy-in to participate in learning, understanding. And I think the HR function, along with your executive committee or whoever that may be, then does that selection and the matching of people.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And if you want more of Bob, who doesn't want more of Bob, right? But Bob, again, is with Boardman and Clark. And Boardman and Clark is the Wisconsin SHRM legislative sponsor, which also provides monthly employment law updates. So we'll have a link to that. So if you want on their monthly employment law update list, they're amazing. But also, if you're in the Wisconsin area, we have our Day on the Hill coming up in February, and Bob is one of our keynote speakers for that conference, and that's a phenomenal conference. So we will also have the information in the show notes for how to register for Day on the Hill. Anything else you want to add for Day on the Hill and the fun that you're going to share with us there?
Well, I look forward to it, because anytime that we have a conference and people show up, it's not just about the learning, it's about seeing each other. It's a place where you can go and let down with your fellow HR people. And so it's a bit of relief.
Is there informal mentoring that happens there, Bob?
All kinds of it. There's actually a reception the night before that is a really good thing for networking, but also to connect with people. And I hesitate to say this, but I've been a member of SHRM now for 40 years.
You're aging yourself.
In that time, I have found that the people that I joined to get professional connections with have become my friends. They have carried me through the traumas of single parenting, of divorce, the joy of remarriage, a heart attack, cancer, and they have reached out and carried me through, as I have been able to reach out and carry them through their career transitions and support each other. And only if you participate and actually show up and meet people do you get the true benefit of this. Compatriots who are willing to give you support in your career and even your life. So that has nothing to do with the program I'm talking about, which is just the annual legal overview of some things that you ought to know, a smattering of things you ought to know. But the real advantage to the conference, any conference, is the connections.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for being on today, Bob. I really appreciate you, and I appreciate us getting this look into your brain and your expertise and what not to do. And please join us at Day on the Hill. And thank you so much. We hope you all have a great rest of your day.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Talent Optimization Podcast. You'll find more tools and resources for CEOs and HR professionals looking to bridge the strategies versus implementation gap of talent optimization at elevatedtalentconsulting.com. We've also created a free, valuable resource for you to begin bridging the gap called the Talent Optimization Foundation Membership Program. You can access it for free at elevatedtalentconsulting.com/foundation. Be sure to tune in next week for another episode to learn more about talent optimization and creating a dream team for your organization.